Grotto and the Tarpit. Tonight, we're going to take a deep dive and a deep look into the government, secret societies, pagan rituals, and the Nephilim, all with our very informative and very well-versed guest, Gary Wing. Gary, how you doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you for inviting me back to your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much,
And
man. We'd love to have you on last time.
yeah, I look forward to having another discussion, and hopefully the last show raised a little bit of curiosity in the audience, and hopefully they like the show. And I think with what we're going to talk about today, I think we're going to really create some interest and maybe dig a little bit deeper into it from other people's ends, because you can never cover everything on these shows, but we can certainly point you in the right direction.
Well, it certainly did. There was a lot of curiosity that was built up from it. So let's just go ahead and dive right in, go straight for the jugular. So, my first question for you is are there Nephilim alive today? As in, are there fallen angels creating new offspring today?
Yeah, I'll take that on in sort of twofold ways, I think, twofold way. First of all, we don't know whether or not there are actual giants around today that are of old. There might be. We have to leave that possibility open. We have the Afghanistan giant incident that happened probably, a decade or so ago now in Afghanistan. And that was a riveting amount of details of either people who knew from the inside, and I'm talking about the pilot here, who was the witness that was on the Coast to Coast show with Steve Quayle, that his details, both on the military and on descriptions of giants, were way too real. So either he saw it or he received details on that were right from, you know, not very many places. I was surprised at how well it lined up with how I described the giants. And so we want to be open to that, because they could survive somehow in stasis. In When we look at angels having advanced technology, and they pass a lot of that technology on to their offspring, the giants, that may have been a possibility. And we have, that is sort of interesting case with um, the Clinton office, Hillary Clinton and her associates, where they put in an official FOIA request for the Gilgamesh tomb. And they were requesting documents pertaining to the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, the location of his body, and the location of the buried. And so, why would you want both the body and the sarcophagus or the burial chamber, unless there is something to that? They wanted to backward engineer DNA, perhaps, or somehow combine it, and hopefully, not hopefully, but that they would, from their perspective, hopefully do something with that. Or there's a technology implied there with the sarcophagus that was a healing chamber. Either way, we know giants had the ability to heal themselves in the past. So, and if people think that's kind of made up, I read that, sort of word for word off of this is what I pulled off from the FOIA. I don't have what they sent them, but it's FOIA number F-201-02110, and it was issued from the office of Hillary Clinton, from a person named Denetra de Senegar. So I just want people to say, hey, look, we don't want to be doing conspiracy stuff, even though I'm a conspiracy writer, but we like to verify things. And this goes to an interconnection between giants and the power elite and our hidden history. So we just sort of want to be aware that there could be giants that survive. We do know that there are giants that survive through the giants producing ancestors or children and down through the generations. And we'll probably talk a little bit more of that. So certainly their descendants are here still today, at least those who claim that they are those descendants. And so the flip side of that coin was, are they producing giants today? Well, maybe the Afghanistan giant might suggest that maybe that is going on, but we're not seeing huge numbers of them. So if they are, they're hidden. And if they are, they're hidden underground, or again through interdimensional travel through portals, which is a standard position of the antediluvian understanding, or the pre-flood understanding, with the technology they had in the age of the gods, where portals, they went back and forth quite regularly. And the Ugaritic text talks about that in extensive ways, not only with Baal and the Baalim Council, but also with their offspring, the Rephaim giants, who had the ability to heal themselves and to heal others. So again, you get that connection with the Hillary Clinton office trying to get information on the sarcophagus and or the body of Gilgamesh to see whether or not probably they would get some of that. So there's a connection there. So, but the trouble is that we don't have the ability to verify that either. But what I would suggest is we want to be open to the fact that giants are going to show up. And the reason why I say that is because it's going to be like the days of Noah, both before and after the flood, when the giants and the gods walked amongst us. So if it's going to be like the days of Noah, depending on how literal you want to take that in terms of all of the events, does that include actual physical giants being created? Because again, just sort of utilizing the Ugaritic text as one source, there are others. You had the parent gods before the flood with El and Ashtaroth creating giants. After the flood, Baal and Anat and the Baalim Council that we get biblically create the Rephaim giants. And so we have, both before and after the flood, the creation of giants, one being a first creation, one being the second incursion, as people like to call it. So we want to be open to that, just as we want to be open to the fact that possibly giants survived the flood. And we can get there biblically because Genesis 6 says God was going to destroy everything he created. And it's repeated again in Genesis 7. Well, he didn't create the giants. Fallen angels did. So from a legal case, you could make an argument for survival. I think a better case is made for a second incursion, but I leave that crack open because there is that sort of scenario, and we don't get a recreation of giants like Genesis 6:4 after the flood. Now, a lot of people might interpret Genesis 6:4, where it says the sons of God went to the daughters of men and did so again afterwards. And as you take that back into Hebrew, it means in like manner. So that could mean multiple incursions before the flood, after the first 200, as the book of Enoch lists the number of the watchers that first created the giants, or more incursions after that, or it could mean after the flood, as they did so again, and in like manner, or it could mean both. So we don't know what that specifically means, but we don't have that smoking gun verse after the flood. But what we do get is the giant showing up. And again, we all, the best we can do is sift through the scripture that we have, and I can get there better scripturally as you connect, particularly the days of Noah with the days of Lot, as Luke does for the end time warning and the destruction by fire. They were doing the same sins as what was being done before the flood. And that
Okay.
comes in
What
Jude
would
1
your
6
opinion
and 2
be?
Peter.
What would your opinion be, that there was a second incursion, or was there some kind of a carrying of the DNA somehow through Ham or something like that?
Well, that's what, yeah, some people say through the DNA of Ham or the wives. But biblically, we don't get Ham as being not the offspring of Noah. And the 8 that are chosen are spiritually chosen and physically chosen, just as the animals are physically chosen not to have been corrupted, because all flesh was corrupted and all the earths. And so that also implies all of the plant genome. And that word corrupted means, it comes from the Hebrew shakoth, meaning to pervert, to ruin, to decay, to destroy. So words that are saying it changed somehow, and all of it was ruined. All of it was corrupted. So when we look at that, how do we get giants and the four races after the flood? And without getting into the nuances of the different sort of four races that seculars have split them into, well, we get that probably through the wives. And we don't know who the wives are. None of them are named biblically. Noah's wife at times is named by different names in other apocryphal accounts, so we don't get a certainty on that name. So I can see, and again, I'm not a total expert on genetics by any stretch of the imagination. I can see how the races could survive in the DNA being passed on, and through one individual matriarch after the flood. What I don't get is how giants are passed on and the races are passed on in that sort of genetic soup that you're getting. And we don't have scripture for it was the DNA that um, was passed on through humankind, which makes no sense if you're starting anew with all uncorrupted flesh. That would seemingly not make a whole lot of sense. So we don't have that biblically. And we also have other anomalies that you have patriarchless tribes that are listed after the flood, like the 9 Canaanite tribes of the 12. We don't have a patriarch, and that's because the patriarchs aren't listed if they're giants. So Rapha for Raphaim's not listed. Arba for the Anakim is not listed. Hori for the Horim is not listed. So if you have no giant patriarch showing up in the table of nations, then the inference is that Raphaim patriarchs were the patriarchal start with a human female of the Canaanites, Hittites, and Sidonians to create giant races like the Amorites, which were smaller than the Rephaim giants. They were the Shazu. The Egyptian records um, have documented that lived amongst giants like the Anak or the Anakim, as we would understand them, and that they were blonde haired like the Anakim. So all sort of circumstantial evidence sort of adds up. So is that a possibility? I suppose I just can't quite walk through the genetic logistics of that happening and then creating them in so many different places all around the world. So for me, the best way is a second incursion, and that's how I think that the giants were populated in great numbers early after the flood, and that these populations were in place in great numbers in the time of the dispersion of Babel. So the people who were dispersed went to live amongst those giants wherever they went, wherever the people from Babel went. So yeah, I think somehow, some way, we're going to see these giants in the end time, and we should be prepared for that. But we're not prepared for that. We're not prepared for most things that are going to go hit a Richter scale of well over 10, sort of use an analogy on earthquakes as one of the pangs, because men's hearts are going to fail them because of what they're seeing going on, according to the book of Luke, in that period of time. So, how can we imagine that? The best way we can do is learn about everything that was going on in the days of Noah and the technology that they had, and that world was probably spared from destruction of fire from the technology that they had and the weapons of war and all of the violence that was going on that the Bible tells us about, and that we are just catching up to that technology today and everything else. So if we want to understand where we're going to go from where we are today as we go headlong into the end times, if we are in the fig tree generation, and I think we are, then that's the only way we can get an idea. And Jesus prepared us for that when he said it's going to be like the days of Noah. And it's not just the superficial stuff, as people continuing and getting married and becoming godless. It is the same as it was at Sodom, as the same after the flood, and the same as it was before the flood, when the gods and the giants walked amongst us somehow, some way.
Okay. Can you go a little more into these stasis giants? Uh, like when they were, did they die and be put into stasis, or were they alive when they got put into stasis? And was this something that was done so they could possibly be resurrected one day?
Yeah.
And also, is that something that was done by like the Egyptian mummies? Were they mummified in hopes that one day they could bring back their DNA?
Yeah, I think there's two different concepts that are going on there. So if I look at a resurrection chamber, um, and look at it as being similar to what was in the Stargate series, that the Goa'uld would go into to heal themselves and give themselves a longer life. If a resurrection chamber suggests that it can bring people back from the dead at a certain point, maybe not forever, right? But a stasis chamber would be something that would provide the same type of extent of light with some sort of altered state. So, a similar type of technology, so that if you're going to be in stasis, you would have to have not only your physical capability sustained, but seemingly your spirit would be able to re-enter into that, um, and the body would still be sort of refreshed. It's not decayed in any sort of manner. So I think that was more designed for, and who knows, maybe they're still sleeping in that body. I mean, we don't know. I mean, there might be a difference from when the body completely dies and their disembodied spirit leaves. So I think if you use that model, that would be before the flood giants. And that was how they were going to survive. And that's how the fallen angels helped them in that sort of case, as to how the angels would help them, whether it's on an ark or in stasis chambers in other dimensions, however that would happen. So I think when we look now at mummification, that's probably more like a post-diluvian technology that they didn't perfect, obviously. And I think what they were trying to do within those burial chambers was to preserve the body in a chemical way versus the technological way, because they'd lost that ability to either build that technology or to power that technology. And it could be either or. So now you try and say, how do we preserve the body so that if there's an opportunity, or the end time isn't that far off, and everybody's been saying it's the end time ever since the end time was thought about, that that disembodied spirit might be able to come back into that body if it was put into a pit prison, or it was being held in another dimension, and it could come back in there and reanimate that body. I think that would have was the hope. I think it was a Hail Mary pass, so to speak, using a football analogy. I don't know how they ever thought that that was going to somehow work, unless there was some technology that could reproduce the oiketerion, the dwelling place for a spirit, the soul and the body, and bring it back to health by reduplicating surviving DNA. That might be the other thought process. But um, so I don't think it was a mechanism necessarily to have them survive. I think it was plan B or C or D, in a Hail Mary long shot aspects. So it's interesting to look at that kind of technology and ritual and belief system and everything that they did with that, because they anticipated they were going to need these things either in the other world or the world to come, however you want to understand that in the polytheist understanding. So that meant they would be somehow able to use physical items, because you wouldn't be able to take physical items into another dimension where only spirits could be, right? It doesn't make a spiritual realm isn't physical. So that implies a coming back. So in the end time, do we have anything that fits like that? Well, yes, we do, when the pit prison is opened. And everybody thinks it's just, these crazy creatures that come out that are likely fallen angels. But there's more in the pit prison than fallen angels. So if we look at Ezekiel 32, we have these mighty ones that are in the sides of the pit prison. That's Gibborim. And these mighty ones are talking to another mighty one, a Rephaim king, Pharaoh, Necho, who would be the Pharaoh of that time. And there are the strong ones in there too, which is El in the Hebrew. So you have fallen angels that are in that pit prison, and then you have these terrible ones, the Arit in Hebrew, Aritim, terrible ones in the plural. I am is the male plural. And they did terrible things on the earth. And for those reasons, they went directly to the pit prison when they were slain versus wandering the earth, wanting to have an oiketerion. So you have to possess people to interact physically to find another soul and body in oiketerion and suppress the host. In their belief system, they also thought that they could get to the heaven where their gods were located in Sheol and Hades in the spirit form after they died if they had enough knowledge to get there. So there's three, in their belief system, there's three locations. The worst one is losing your head and going directly to the pit prison is a terrible
one. Okay. This might be a little bit of a tangent, but I know you were talking about how it talks about the pit being open. Do you think that has some kind of connection with CERN? Because I
Sure.
know one of the things that's brought up is that one of the area where CERN is, the main god was Apollo, and we all
Yeah.
know that the keys are given to Abaddon,
Yeah.
the keys to the bottomless pit, and they're brought up. You think there's a possibility that, and I know they've when they're smashing these particles and stuff like that, they've gotten pictures of like fallen or ancient Hindu gods. You think these gods have a body somewhere and they're gonna re-inhabit it?
Yeah, a lot there. So when we look at the word god Apollo and the word Apollo, it is a derivative and part of the series of the words Apollyon, which is destroyer. So not the god Apollo. If you're looking for a destroyer god, you're going to look at Shiva in the Sanskrit version, or in the Avestan Persian version, that would be Mitra or Mithra. And biblically, or biblically associated, would be Azazel out of the book of Enoch that taught all the arts of the war. That's the destroyer god. These gods come back in the end time, and they destroy the world by fire and then recreate a new earth. And so when we look at these gods, are also living in Hades, Hades or Sheol in the other world. And one, they're either located in Shambhala or Argata. And they could be two different gods, or it could be a different name for the same place. And so the king that comes back in the end time is also there. This is, again, as we relate that back to Antichrist, as coming up out of the pit prison, as Revelation 17 talks about. So there's an association here with this destroyer god that is going to come up out of the pit prison in the end time. And so what's the connection to CERN when they're trying to go interdimensionally? Well, they're wanting to get into two places. One, into heaven to prepare to storm heaven again, as Revelation 12 talks about, and also to get their gods out of the pit prison and before the ordained time if they can. So when we look at now taking these Indo-Aryan, Sanskrit, Persian gods back to the original understanding of who they are, these are degraded seraphim gods, just as Azazel was a degraded seraphim god. And so Azazel is also depicted in that degraded form as a goat god with horns. And you also have CERN associated with Shiva as a destroyer god, and they do rituals and dances and all sorts of things in that sort of connection. And when we look at what the Indo-European word or Indo-Aryan word is for a horn god, it is CERN, pronounced CERN or Kern. So all they've done is created an acronym to apply to their occult understanding of how they label everything after their gods, right? And who is in the pit prison that they would want to be getting back? It's Azazel and all of the fallen angels, and understood as Mitra, and also understood as Shiva. And one of the where it sort of kind of comes together to a certain degree is between the East and the West, and the understanding of this as one God is with the Templars, who worshipped Baphomet. And Baphomet was the god ahead of wisdom, and he was depicted as this goat head in their imagery. And so Baphomet, you get there through sort of an informal thing in French of Bapho, which is the formal is I'm trying to remember the formal in the French now is starts with P.
Baphomet.
What's that?
Baphomet.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the French word for father. That's formal, but the informal is papa. And Bapa, as it's translated, was originally transliterated back to, and Baphomet was an ancient god in the Occitan section of France. And Bapho, as you take that back into Sanskrit, is Bapo or Bapho, because the H is a evolution of the name, and that means father. So the true understanding there is you sort of connect that. This is Father Mitra. And this is the god Azazel that supplied all of the knowledge that they worship in secret societies before the flood. And he's the destroyer god. So what you see is just this understanding in the occult that there are different names all around the world for different gods, but they're the same god. So the main ones are always the same.
Okay. So with that there's something I wanted to mention. Like it says that Nimrod started to become a mighty man. Does that imply some kind of awakening of some hidden DNA? And I also wanted to ask about like there's pagan rituals and stuff like that where like they'll conceive a baby on a certain day to bring out certain characteristics, or there's rituals like, let's say, the bride of Satan, where now they pretty much they're to birth the antichrist or something like that. Are these rituals somehow awakening this Nephilim DNA, which could possibly be in all of us?
Yeah, that's just run some of that by me again, because there's a lot there. I want to make
Yeah, I
sure I
know.
connect it. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, it says that Nimrod started to become a mighty man. So he
Yeah.
wasn't a mighty man to begin with.
Right.
So
Okay.
is
Yeah.
that implying some kind of awakening of his DNA? And with that, I kind of wanted to segue into, there's pagan
Yeah.
rituals of, like, let's say, the bride of Satan, or conceiving a baby on a certain day. So they come out with these certain evil traits.
Sure.
Is that all some kind of awakening, some dormant Nephilim DNA that might be in everybody now, because they say all flesh will be corrupted. So it's possible we're all corrupted.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. So what we do know is Nimrod was the offspring of Cush. So likely not your prototypical Rephaim or Nephilim, but he became a mighty one, a Gibborim, a Gibbor in the singular, and that infers a change. infers a modification. Now, is that genetic? Is that technology? Is that somehow able to do something that can morph you into something different, like a chain shifter type of thing? I mean, so it's a very interesting is how does he become one? You can become one by imitating one, so you'd be giant-like. But that word Kal-Al, as it comes out of the Hebrew, it is associated with rituals and sexual rituals and a breaking of a bond and rebelling against God. And so again, that sort of adds a little bit to it. And if you look at the polytheist accounts of the Tower of Babel that Nimrod biblically is credited for building, then where does this technology come from biblically? We don't know, but what we are told that as acting as one people with one language, anything they decide to do, they're going to be able to do eventually. And so God disperses them by dispersing the languages. In the polytheist version, they receive the ancient knowledge from a fellow named Hermes, who brings that knowledge to Nimrod, and they start to build the city and the tower. So what other technology came with that if it's the technology of the antediluvian epoch? Well, we might get a hint of that, and there are different versions of the Tower of Babel in polytheist accountings, whether or not it's the Tower of Eridu or it's the Akkadian version that uses Babalu as the name, which ILU is the transliteration of AL or EL for an angel or a god. And in their understanding of the definition, it doesn't mean confusion of languages as we get that down through the Hebrew. It means a portal or a gateway of the gods that he was building so that he could perhaps get into the pit prison and let those beings out, or go into heaven and make war with God if you got a little line again, which you have accounts in some of the Apocrypha that talks about that. So it's interesting that there's this implied technology, and then he becomes like a giant or became a gibbering. Gibbering doesn't always describe giant, but generally it does. And so something changes in him. So is there technology that is involved with that change? Or does he use technology to become like one? But he certainly imposes the same religion on the humans as was the religion of the giants, was the Enochian mysticism as we know about it and call it, or at least I call it, of the religion that Enoch, son of Cain, started and was the worldwide religion. In the secular and polytheist versions, they call that Zoroastrianism, which split into those two Sanskrit versions, one into the Indus Valley and one into Persia, for the Sanskrit and Avesta versions of Zoroastrianism, where Mitra is a god of, and Shiva becomes sort of an evolved god and a composite god as we understand it today, but still talking about the same god with just sort of a different sort of route how he shows up sort of mysteriously after the flood. And also all these other horned gods, whether or not it's like Odin or Cernunnos or CERN in the Etruscan pantheon, are goat gods like the pan gods that seemingly are out of place in the hierarchy after the flood, but are really, really important. And I think they're just recognizing either ones that were degraded, that didn't go to the pit prison because they didn't do all of the most malicious crimes, or they're just honoring those 200, and particularly Azazel, for creating the giants. So it's hard to know, but there's just too much of these connections. But antediluvian knowledge does show up after the flood as it comes down through polytheism. It's the knowledge that they used to build all of the early post-diluvian temples and palaces, and then the knowledge that comes down through the king of Tyr to give to Solomon and to train the Israelites into building the first temple. So we know there's this additional knowledge. It's just how much knowledge was there. But certainly he changed. And what's also interesting is if that word Kal-El sounds familiar, that's the House of El in the Superman series. And Superman's name is Kal-El, and his father is Jor-El of the House of El. And so none of that's a coincidence. Neither is that crazy little S that looks like a serpent for a seraphim angel that's on there.
So do those pagan rituals, do they awaken DNA? Like, let's say if I know one of the things they used to do is that they used to impregnate priests of Ishtar
yeah,
on Easter, and
yeah.
like sacrifice those babies. Are there other rituals where they might awaken this Nephilim DNA?
Well, certainly to bring back a spirit, they can in their belief system they can do, and also and to make contact. But they have lots of rituals that would raise the dead, right? So, and some of these people who had the ability to raise the dead, some of them were saints in the Catholic Church. So I think that's just showing you that some of that belief system crosses over through Gnosticism into some of the particular orders. Um, and if you're wondering which one I'm referring to, St. Patrick had that mythos a part of him. And if you do some research on him, he's actually raised some people from the dead, which.
And he has some strange relations with the snakes too, doesn't he?
He has a very strange relationship with the snakes as well. So, and the bards of Celticism were understood as serpents. That's what they called themselves. So you wonder what type of snakes he was running out of Ireland.
So this might sound like a little bit of a silly question, and I know it probably is, but um, one of the things like you were mentioning with that they wanted to do, which they were opening this portal, or they wanted to make this gate to the gods, which could have been a portal to get into heaven, a roundabout
Yep.
way.
Yep.
And also God, said, I'm going to confound their language and disperse them because nothing will be held from them. So since one of the things that they wanted to do was get into heaven and kill God and put their gods in his place, do you think that would have been possible? Would they have been able to kill God?
Oh, I don't think they ever had a chance to kill God, but they had to try.
Yeah.
And
they could have at least gotten into heaven or something, right?
well, yeah, I mean, if nothing is new under the sun and what was will be again, then one deduces that they stormed heaven at one time in the rebellion, and they may have tried at other times, and maybe that's what Nimrod was trying to build, so that they could do that. And certainly in the end time, in Revelation 12, there's a war in heaven. So there's obviously something more to it than just the end time aspect, because what we're seeing is this continual cycle that happens. They're always trying to bring about the end time. God interceded, I think, with the flood to prevent the earth from being destroyed by fire, which 2 Peter 3 talks about as being reserved for the end time. So
I'm sorry, I knew it was a little bit of a silly question, but I just
no,
wanted to
it's
ask
not.
it.
It's important to understand that this is if we are living in that generation,
Well,
we may see that
if anything, that's
as
what they
witnesses.
wanted to do.
That's what
They had this notion of they wanted to kill God.
Yes, and they
So
still do if they could, but I
yeah,
don't.
if they could, they would.
Yeah,
So
and
I wanted
I
to
don't think,
ask.
but I don't ever think they thought they could win. But they would want to push it far enough that they could win a realm on their own without being overseen by God. And I think that is still the game plan. I think they teach their followers and their offspring they can win.
Yeah.
But they knew God intimately. They knew how powerful he was. And they can't do what he can do, so why did they think they could win?
Well, of course, nobody wants to be on a losing team, so they got to brainwash them.
Yes, so you have to tell them that's what they're, they have to tell that through the religions, to deceive people to rebel against God like they did. And again, I think that's part of trying to justify their rebellion as part of the game that they're playing with us as sacrificial um, pawns, so to speak, so that they can legitimize winning a peace treaty to live on their own. I know those are pretty generic sort of terms for this grand thing that's been going on for a long period of time, but I don't think it's much more complicated than that.
Okay. So my next question is, how do fallen angels interact with the world today? Do they still become physical beings? And do they still have the same powers they had before they fell?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with the last part first. Um, I think as we look at the information that we are provided, is there is a continuous receding of the powers that the fallen angels are permitted to do. And so, depending on how old this world actually is and when the war actually first occurred, whether it was between Genesis 1 2 or sometime early on, um, after day 6, I would probably think it fits a little bit better a little bit further downstream. But they seemingly had, if you had a destruction between Genesis 1 1 and 2, with the gap theory and the renewal of the earth theory talks about, and you can get there biblically, but we're not going to litigate that case today. But so it's a what if. Um, and you destroyed the earth down to its foundations, and you'd have to renew the earth, and that is planet destruction capability. And then you'd have the firmament collapse on each other, and you have to separate it as you go through the renewal of the earth when God sends his Holy Spirit, as Psalms 104 talks about. So that would be the pinnacle of their power permitted to be used, or whenever that rebellion happened. Maybe it wasn't quite to that degree, but certainly in polytheism, they get the destruction of the world, particularly in the Vedic and Upanishads and Sanskrit versions. They have the war of the gods that is basically destroying the world in that war. So as we move forward, after the earth would be recreated with that or renewed, they're having less ability to manipulate creation and the power that's being applied. So what do is they create offspring to do their bidding for themselves. And so that they don't have blood on their hands. And they create giants initially that are immortal, both physically and spiritually. God takes away the physical aspect in Genesis 6:3 and limits life to 120 years. And they can produce giants in great numbers as offspring before the flood. After the flood, they don't have that immortal body. They don't live as long. They have a fertility issue. They have to intermarry with humans. They're not as big, and there's a degradation. And after the crimes with before the flood, the parent gods are taken to the pit prison. After the flood, you have its offspring god. So whether it's Zeus with Hercules versus Kronos as the parent god, or Ra and Osiris and the Egyptian pantheon, it's the offspring gods that are going to produce the lower giants, and they're going to go to the pit prison. But they created giants that were not as big, not as powerful, and whatever other gifts that weren't passed on. And then you had, because if you look at angels as being the host of heaven, both loyal and disloyal, the stars of the heaven host, that's the Hebrew word Saba, meaning an army of angels, meaning there's rank and order. And so in the disloyal ones, they have their own host, which we're told not to worship, right? That's the council of the gods that rules over this world. that Satan sits above. And if you don't think that they do not run this world today, when Jesus came and he was at the end of his fasting in the desert after 40 days, guess who shows up? Satan. Satan wants him to follow him and bend his knee to him. And if he does, he showed him all the kingdoms of the world that he controls that he would give them. What that's telling us is he still controls this world, and the council of the gods are still there. That is talked about in Psalms 82. So after Baal and Anat and the Baalim council go as the offspring gods to the pit prison to join their parent gods, you just have other ones that move up. They still rule over the 70 nations of this world through the council of the gods, and Satan still, trying to emulate God, sits above that council. So yes, they still control this world. But after Babel, they're not walking amongst us anymore. Something else changes. So can they still come into this world? I think so. Maybe there are more restrictions whether or not they can come in a physical form. Or if they do, you're going to require instant sort of punishment with that. You know, just as the disembodied spirits of Legion were afraid that they were going to be sent to a place they didn't want to go before their time. When Jesus encountered them, it would be sort of akin to that. But I think they can still take a physical form, even though they may not be permitted. But as we get closer to the last 7 years, and particularly in the last 7 years, they're just going to throw caution to the wind because they know they only have 7 years left. And we also get depicted with these fallen angels in the end time celebrating at the destruction of Babylon at the midpoint of the last 7 years in Isaiah 13, and then celebrating again in Isaiah 34. So we also have these angels being led out of the pit prison before the midpoint of the last 7 years. So I think we're likely to see these things in maybe not an angelic form that they would have been in the past, but something that they might find would be more legalistically allowable, but still deceiving the people that they are superior beings, but maybe just aliens. I mean, I'm just trying to create how you get around if you have these restrictions being imposed, which there seems to be, which seems to be the MO, but yet we're going to see the war in heaven. We're going to have them amongst us completely, all of them, in the last 3.5 years. And one deduces that the polytheists believe they're going to come back as well, because Alice Bailey, for example, of the Gnostics talked about 2025 not only as the return of Lord Maitreya, which receives the incarnation of Mitra. Maitreya is a transliteration of Mitra into an antichrist type figure as from a Christian perspective, versus they'll look at it as their Messiah. But also that you're going to have these creatures that are going to be walking amongst us beforehand, I think, in some sort of way. And I would even say that that probably goes back to a little bit before the start of the last 7 years, but I don't have scripture for that, but that would be my speculation, that they're just going to take another type of form to get around whatever those regulations or restrictions are, even though by the end of the last 7 years, they're still going to the lake of fire, as Matthew 25 talks about, that the lake of
You
fire
kind
was
of
created for the
tiptoed into
devil
my
and his
next question.
followers. Yeah.
You kind of tiptoed into my next question, so I'm gonna ask it is, where do you think the connection is between the fallen angels and Nephilim and aliens? Are aliens the actual fallen angels? Are they some kind of genetic creation where it can be like a hand in glove situation where the fallen angel possesses the alien body or something like that, or even a demonic spirit possessing that alien body?
Yeah. So it's a possibility that the restrictions may be so much so that they have to have some sort of clone body that doesn't have a spirit in it created for them to enter into. It's certainly a possibility. And certainly in the alien sort of mythos, you get like the Anunnaki, which are somehow associated with the alien mythos. And Anunnaki are the gods of Sumeria. And an Anunnaki, as you get them depicted on the reliefs with either an eagle's face or a human's face, is likely a cherubim. And those are one of the four faces of each there. There is also a face of a bull and a face of a lion that when they take a physical form, they're going to take that shape. So they may be taking a little bit different form than what their normal nature would be, but they're going to walk amongst us, and I think that's the thing to remember. And so you also have you have this connection with the Anunnaki that crosses over from the alien mythos and the Watcher mythos. And of course, if you're going to do a hierarchy, you're going to put the angelic beings at the top of the hierarchy, even in the physical realms. So the offspring is more than just giants. And so, do we expect giants? Yes. And will they be recreated? Possibly, we talked about, or will they receive an oikotarian as well? But there are other beings that the gods created in polytheism. And these are called little ones. These are called fairies. We would know them as in three different groups. In the smaller ones, you'd have ugly ones like hobbits and dwarves and gnomes, and you have good-looking ones, and you also have mischievous ones. So mischievous ones would be like leprechauns, for example. Um, and the fourth group is a reptilian group, and it's larger than a human, very much similar to these reptilians that you get in the urban legends living in the earth. And these are called elementals in the occult. There's four different groups. They're associated with a specific elemental like air, wind, and fire. And these are all created by the gods in polytheism around the world. And
what about clones? Uh, there's a big movement now that believes that people, like let's say today's stars in Hollywood, are actually clones of Nephilim. You think that's possible?
yeah, I'll come back to that. I'll just finish up quickly on the elementals.
Mhm.
So we have one group of elementals called grays, gray gnomes, and they've been with us all along, understood as fairies, and they do abductions and they do sexual experimentation, and then they return people. They have flying UAPs or UFOs, and they come through portals. It's the exact same description with the being and the kidnappings as with the grays in the alien mythos. Biblically, we can get there this way. So in Galatians 4, 3, and 9, it talks about the elementals in association with the fallen angels who enslave us in this world. And in Colossians 2, you get the rudiments that mentioned twice. Same Greek word for rudiment and elemental, stoichion, and again associated in Colossians 2 with the fallen angels and those who rule this world and not to worship angels. And so we should be aware that we've had these elementals with us all along with this technology, and that they will likely be part of that deception. So the elementals will also create clones for their bodies in that mythos. And so they would have that technology to be able to do that. But they still, even with the cloning, they still have to have human DNA to regenerate because they can only reproduce Xerox copies, so to speak, so far. And so that I think is all part of the mythos of how we're going to be told these are all intelligent beings from around the galaxies and universe that are all united to fight against the great God of the Bible.
Theta Reticula.
Yeah. So your question was stars, Hollywood stars, in relationship to, is that possible clones, or is that possible um, offspring of the fallen angels or descendants? Well, it's interesting. I mean, Paramount uses the 23 stars of Enoch in its mountain scene. Stars are an allegory for angels um, throughout the Bible, in both the Old and the New Testament. We know that if you're going to be popular in Hollywood, you have to pay the price and be one of the ones that they select, or of the genealogies, or of the bloodlines, or of the DNA. So there you could have a combination of a number of things in there. Is that these could be DNA modified Oikotarians cloned for a spirit to dwell in. And there's always been a relationship, or it could be just one of the descendants, right? Because again, all of the Hollywood entertainment is basically on a 99% rule, basically. Um, it's polytheist, it's not monotheist, and it honors their pantheon, their history, not monotheism. So when we look at the product that they produce and their history of entertainment, they used to wear these theater masks. And all of the theater, whether or not it was in the time of Shakespeare and before, or even to this day, or the ancient Roman theater, or the ancient Roman Greeks, and it used to be, for the most part, this pale mask, just as would be painted on shamans or in the Day of the Dead rituals. It's that same sort of look. And what they were trying to do in becoming an actor of one of these ancient heroes, one of these ancient giants of the bloodlines, is they would want to become that character, just as they're trying to get into character today. They're trying to channel that disembodied spirit. So if that was the intent all the way through, and if they had the ability now to create that, why wouldn't you just say, we don't have to try and channel? Why don't we just create our own body and we'll become the actor, right? Why, let's take out the middleman, so to speak. And I'm not saying that that's actually what is going on, because I don't know, but I know there's this crazy connection between theater, ancient giants, and channeling. And that's not a coincidence, especially when all of that entertainment is about polytheism and their genealogies and their belief systems. So there has to be sort of a connection there. And even, the tragedy, it's a tragedy of a hero, right? Especially in the ancient classics and the fairy tale classics, they have a happy ever after ending so that the hero doesn't meet his tragic death. And Tolkien and Lewis called that a eucatastrophe in their literature, so that the hero is spared that, and the reader is spared that horrific death. You create this happily ever after ending. So you also have, you have Greek tragedies based on ancient giants and bloodlines. And also, if you look at the satire aspect, that's another type of genre based around satyr gods. And I walked through that in book 2 for people.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that answer. I was gonna ask, is there a connection between the Nephilim and religious organizations such as Vatican and Islam?
So to understand that, so people have a good frame of reference to the answer as certainly a significant influence at the minimum. Um, when you look at polytheism, you have bloodline priests, just as you had bloodline royales. Why? Because they're all part of the giant elite, Elim system of noble ones, or Aryans, as Aryan means noble ones and nobility. And so these individuals, the upper class, would only sort of educate themselves, and the lower two classes were for small entrepreneurs like blacksmiths and bakers and tailors, and lower than that is the working class and the slave class, or the ritual class, depending on how far back you go. It's the same four-class system all over the world that's inexplicably in place, and the European system was just called the feudal system. You can go to the First Nations today in their uh, nations, they still have that in play, and for the most part, with bloodline chiefs and bloodline shamans, medicine men. And this was a standard coming out of before the flood and again after the flood. So they controlled the religion with their priests, bloodline priests. Biblically, when we get monotheism, we have Levite priest bloodlines. So again, everything is done to counterfeit what's in monotheism. And so when Christianity comes along, it eventually is going to be merged with Constantine with a lot of Mithraic belief systems. Celebration days, garb, headwear, all sorts of different things. And so once it becomes the state-sponsored religion, but now a bit of a morphed religion to satisfy the polytheist side of the Roman Empire and to the rising power of the Christian community, you have this new state religion. But it's not that long before they start to take over that whole central organization once it becomes centralized at the Vatican, where it was a decentralized one and very hard because there wasn't a hierarchy really in place. You had the seven churches to a certain degree, but it was very much like the Judaic version, where yes, you had a central temple, but you had all of these other synagogues that were kind of on their own, but all sort of centered around some of the scripture, right? But there wasn't a real hierarchy. And so once you have that being controlled and only the elite being educated, they start to put their bloodlines into the Pope positions. Now, I'm not saying all of the priests and I'm not saying all of the popes were polytheists. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they've had an influence on it all the way through, just as they control all other religions, all with the intent to bringing about the universal religion of Babylon for the end time. So yes, there's an influence there. It's always going on. And I think from a Catholic sort of perspective, we can look at it from the conservative and the liberal movement. You can see that in Protestantism as well, but you see more visibly that fight within the Roman Catholic Church, and priests that will come out and say, hey, I'm a conservative priest or I'm more of a liberal priest. They actually come out and say that in masses now. So I don't know whether you have heard that, but I've heard it several times, and my wife's a Catholic, so I've attended Catholic churches quite often in my life. And so I think
I
that
think the last two popes were on the opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
I would say so.
Francis was real liberal, and this new one's supposed to be a lot more conservative.
Supposed to be, but I'm not convinced of that yet.
Yeah,
that
well,
we'll
they can put on whatever show
does.
they want to put on.
Yes, we'll see what he actually does. He's been very quiet, so which is kind of nice too. But um, anyways, I digress. So, and I'm not here to mock any. I'm just saying this is the organizational structure, and that if we are going to have the septimonium emerge for Babylon on the Seven Hills with Palatine Hill, understand Vaticanus Hill was in ancient times a branch of Palatine Hill of the Sibylline prophecies and the seat of idolatry in John's time. So they will try and exercise their control with how many they have in there and following their belief systems to take control. And you have the same influence in Protestantism. And I would anticipate and suggest that the polytheists have control over the seminary schools, both in Roman Catholicism and in Protestantism, because they do not want to teach things like prehistory and prophecy. And they're instructed not to teach that. And all of this sort of liberal interpretive approach seems to come down through the leaders of the churches who are being educated by non-conservatives, probably polytheists who have infiltrated the church. And we start to see all of this Masonic symbolery that goes on in churches, which is usually a key to look for to see whether or not that church has been influenced by the Gnostics or not.
So on the same token, how have the Nephilim infiltrated secret societies?
They are the creators of the secret societies, is the easiest way to put it. So basically, you have the secret societies who take their beginnings back to before the flood in their history. And they take it back to the beginning of Enoch, son of Cain, as their significant, most important patriarch, being Enoch, because what he does is he takes the knowledge that Adam provides, according to their accounts, that he was taught by Adam to run this massive project between Euphrates and the Nile to Mount Hermon to the Indian Ocean. And there's only one of them, and then later he gets a helper. That he was taught a lot of knowledge, particularly agrarian knowledge, but other knowledge as well as on astronomy and whatever else he would need to run that type of operation. And that he passes this on to his sons, Cain being one of them, and he corrupts the language. Enoch, son of Cain, then takes this and puts it into the 7 sacred sciences that we know as the 7 liberal arts today. And out of the 7 sacred sciences is a creation of the mystical religion to keep the development of this knowledge a secret from the mundane. And this is also the same religion and secret societies that are going to cross the flood. But continuing with this, so now you're going to have the development of this knowledge into the 7 liberal arts as we know it as today, and you're going to develop mystery schools for the mystical religions to educate the elite, which are only the descendants of the giants, and they're going to control all the literature, all the writings, all the education. And out of that comes the secret societies because they take their beginnings back to that. And we see that today with initiatory organizations on university campuses even to this day, whether or not you start with sort of basic alpha house and go right up to skull and bones, right? It's all part of that system. That's part of the history. And so when we look at secret societies, they take their beginnings back to that time of that 7 sciences merging with the knowledge from the fallen angels or the gods in polytheism. And at that time is the creation of the giants who are going to take over the nobility because of their size and strength and ability to produce, and continued that whole process again after the flood. So they created the secret societies for themselves. And in the West, we see an evolution of that through the Masonic royals with the Templars, who excavated under Jerusalem and became very, very powerful as this secret society, initiatory organization, monastic order of warriors within the Catholic Church. And when they're disbanded, they're going to sort of split away into decentralized groups because they had all the banking, all the knowledge, all the military power, everything was kept under one central organization. So afterwards, you're going to get that split into other organizations. And it's going to begin with the invisible ones of the 33, who were the senior order who created the original Templars, and then it separated into a senior and a junior order in 1118 with the crowning of Fauconjou as King of Jerusalem, Baldwin II, as he was known. And you had the Priory of Sion, which was the Council of the Barons, Council of the Royals, and then you had the Paeon becoming Grand Master for the junior group. And so then you had a senior and a junior order all the way there, all the way through. So the Rosicrucians are going to be the ones who are going to be front and center with the invisible ones in 1317 after the fall in 1307. And so in 1307, the 33 invisible ones are trying to reestablish the Templars. They try and do that within the church. They can't. The Pope wants full control, so they poison them and they take their idea elsewhere. And so that Council of 33 is 33 families of invisible ones, of royales. And they're going to separate that up to the 13 families at the top. And then as things develop, they're going to be in with the splitting away of the Knights Templar after losing Jerusalem in 1188 before the destruction of the Templars in 1307. There's a split of the senior order because the junior order lost Jerusalem, which was their main purpose for being formed. And so they formed the Rosicrucians from that. Okay, so you have the original invisible ones that are forming the Rosicrucians, but as you go through the Grand Master history, you're going to see that go from royales of like Sinclairs and Geezers down to more of an educated class. That's when you're going to see that invisible 33 split into the lower order of the Rosicrucians. So other organizations that they're going to create to decentralize is the Illuminati, which is going to be below the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons. That is at the bottom and the first level of adepthood. So the order looks like that, but they're all genealogical descendants of giants at the adept level, starting at the 3rd degree York Rite or 33rd degree Scottish Rite in Freemasonry. And above that, you have higher degrees and purer bloodlines as you move up. So the Rosicrucians today would be the rising lower bloodlines from giants in the lower half of the Rosicrucians that come through the Masonic adepts and the Illuminati, and then the top half is made up of bloodlines represented from the 300 families, the Council of 300 Family, Committee of 300 Families, the Council of 33 Families, and the 13 families.
So which one's on top? What secret society is on top of all of them?
13 families.
13 families?
In the
So
West.
would you say?
In the West.
In the West?
There are other organizations around the world that the Western bloodlines participate in. Not all 13 are on that council, but, and it's hard to get information on that. I've been told different numbers, anywhere from 3 to 6 families are on the World Bloodline Council. So you have secret societies wherever you have elites. It's the same organizational structure. So in China, you have the Wutsu Society, which is the 5 ancestors, which goes right back to the creation of the sons of heaven, or the offspring of the dragon creator gods, and the bloodlines that comes down through the Shah dynasty. President Xi would be a bloodline of the Western branch of that Shah bloodline.
So would you say that there's definitely a glass ceiling? If you're a person trying to get into these organizations and you have no trace of a bloodline to these Nephilim bloodlines, you might as well accept the fact that you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, you're not getting anywhere likely. The only way you can, if you intermarried into the bloodlines, like a low level one, you might have the ability to maybe get the first level of adept, but then you'd be looking to intermarry with higher or more pure bloodlines to maintain that sort of status. But for the average person, no, you're just there for camouflage, to create a rouge around what the adepts are doing. So they, like Freemasons, they do a lot of work in charities, and business associates like to interlink there. That's just for public consumption, so the adepts can work on the true agenda. And you
Now,
know nothing until you become an adept. You get taught things, but it's pablum. You don't get taught the true meanings or the true secrets because you're not worthy yet.
okay, when it comes to like Western society, especially here in America, we're brought up with the thought, and which is in our foundation documents, that we're all created equal, and so pretty much our government was for the people. So we're supposed to be, the government isn't supposed to be entirely big, but what is the grip that the Nephilim has on the U.S. government and other governments now, and should we be, pretty much ready for totalitarianism?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to sort of keep in mind. The first one is the Council of God still rule over all of the nations. There's an original 70 nations. And we have a lot more nations than 70 nations in the world today, but the additional nations were spawned by the original nation, right? And there's an original God, but there's a God assigned to every nation. So we need to understand that. So when you're swearing an oath to your country, you're swearing an oath to a specific God who governs this country. Or if you're a royale swearing an oath, you're swearing an oath to a specific God who has authorized your bloodline to be the royale. So we have that to keep in mind. We also have dualism in polytheism, where you've got good versus evil, good magic, black magic, white hats, dark hats is kind of the terminology that's used for today, but they're all polytheists, white hat or dark hat. And they use that pulls apart strategy to cattle herd humans into the direction where they want us to go. So polytheism likes totalitarianism. They like ruling of kings. They were willing to do things in different ways to bring about the end time faster than shorter. So that's how you get the new world developed and some of the democracies that are developed, but they're always trying to control that democracy. And so typically they get control of the main parties. They like just two, so that one can take over from the other all of the time. And essentially they're doing an established policy, maybe some nuances on either side, but going in the same sort of direction. So when we look at where those who feel they have the divine right to rule, many who are sitting in the backgrounds are, how they want to go from where we are to the end time, which they want to bring about, we have to get back to a new Atlantis, as they like to call it, which had 10 giant kings, offspring of of Poseidon and Clymene, Atlas being the most famous, and Atlantis. And there was
Wasn't
10,
it 10 pairs of twins?
10 there was, yeah, 5 pairs of twins. So 10
5 pairs.
kings. Yeah. And they ruled over the Atlantean Empire in different empires. And so we have 10 king empire slated for the end time that comes out of the book of Daniel and also in Revelation. And that's what they're wanting to rebuild. So you're going to have to get into that sort of zone of 10 main families or groups of, of bloodlines working together in an alliance with one taking control of that empire. So when Trump is talking about his golden age and spheres of influence, he's talking about a new Atlantis. He's talking the language that I don't like. I was hoping he'd slow things down, not speed things up, but he looks like he's speeding things up. So yes, they want to eliminate the democracy if they can't control it the way that they want to. And ultimately, they want to just control it. And ultimately, we're told we're going to get to 10 kings of 10 empires. So there's going to be 10 groups of nations that are going to get together through a military alliance, economic alliance, but it's going to get there. But it's going to take wars and rumors of wars to get there. It's going to take catastrophes to sort of bring that about, but we're starting to see that. And we're seeing that individuals like Trump and Xi and Putin are saying, we don't imagine the New World Order in the same vision as the Western bloodlines. We will not be dominated by that. And each are saying, we want this New World Order. We're not against that. Or Nephilim World Order might be a better way of calling it. They just want a larger role and a lot lesser role by the European bloodlines. And that's sort of what we're seeing. So, yeah, I would expect that once things really get more dangerous is democracy is going to be suspended, and we're going to see strange, unusual alliances crop up, and that there's going to be a control. Whether or not all of them will admit to being of the bloodlines or not, we don't know. But I would look at, a possibility that however we might get there is you would have Canada and the United States and Australia and New Zealand as part of the divine right to rule of the Windsor family, as they would think about it. Whether or not they get all of that and how that would come about, or would the US be the major player in how that comes about? Understand in the backgrounds, they're still going to be worshiping the same God that is the God of that bloodline and or nation.
So, since you brought up the Windsors and stuff like that, when it comes to World War One, where they started taking out the czars and these different kings that are Nephilim bloodlines, was that some kind of revolt of normal people trying to take down Nephilim, or was it just Nephilim against Nephilim?
So World War I is a classic example to understand what goes on behind the scenes in geopolitics and what it takes to understand what's going on. This was a family war, an inter-family squabble. They were all, whether or not it was the Romanovs or Kaiser Wilhelm's family in Germany, or the Habsburgs, or the Bourbon of Spain, or the Savoy of Italy, or the Hanovers of England, who changed their name to Windsor in World War I because the Hanovers is a German bloodline. They were all on first name basis, and they were all first cousins.
Yeah, I think like the one of the czars from Russia, and I think it was Romanian or something like that. They looked exactly alike.
Yeah, because they continue to intermarry because they believe they have the superior divine bloodline. They have to be careful of blood diseases like Habsburg's jaw disease or hemophiliac disease. So they have to keep at least sort of 4 generations, and they also have to keep replenishing that with human DNA. So they do some lower bloodline levels to keep sort of intermarrying in with the higher bloodlines. Let's say Prince Charles and Diana, for example, right? Very low level bloodlines with Diana, very high royal bloodlines with Charles. And now we get King Charles as king, and we got King William. And so that's how they sort of go about doing it, by keeping the genealogies as pure as they can, or ennobling it with other ones. So what happens in World War I now is there's something that's been created by the Western bloodlines called social masonry, which is going to produce people like I have a very severe head cold today, so my mind's not working as fast as normal. I'm looking for the Lenin, and who creates communism. Social masonry is the doctrine for communism. It's the doctrine for anarchism. It's the doctrine for socialism. It's the doctrine for progressive progressive socialism, which we would know as National Socialism. And they're all a little bit nuanced. So what they did was they created communism first, and they put that as a virus into Russia to take down a more pure bloodline. So what you have to understand as I'm talking about this, they all know that they think that they're getting closer to the end time. And at the end time, Antichrist is the one who's going to reign over the whole world. And he's actually going to take out 3 kings and then replace them with his probably kin bloodlines. And so this is a rivalry to be which family is going to run the world. And that's why it doesn't always seem they're working together. They are directionally, but they all want to be the ruling family. So they took out the Romanov bloodline. And in World War I, that basically brought down the Kaiser dynasty in Germany. Right? And the fallout of that as you get into World War II, which is just the resolution of World War I, you're going to see the Habsburg dynasty being weakened all throughout that process. You're going to have the Savoy dynasty in Italy disappear. You're going to have the Bourbons disappear in Spain. And what you're basically left with is like Anjou bloodlines who aren't technically ruling France from a king perspective, and the Hanover bloodlines. And so there's this reducing of rivalries that are going on. And then out of that you get this new Europe where the bloodlines are starting to work together for the first time for a common end. But they're not satisfied with just taking down these bloodlines. What they do in World War II is they launch communism into China, which takes down the Shah bloodline, another significant rival. And even though the Yamato bloodline is left in power in Japan, that's reduced to almost figure status, at least from how it appears. Whether or not that's real or not, I'll let other people decide. So
basically, what we think these wars are about, it's not even anything to do with that. It's just a falsehood to, over competing families.
Yes.
Wow.
So now roll forward to Putin. Well, he believes he is of the Puchianan bloodline. That the name Putin, it comes out of nowhere as you trace that back to about 1850 or so to either his great grandfather or grandfather, who is born out of wedlock with the Kievan bloodline, which is the Puchianan bloodline, which is a pure blood Indo-Aryan bloodline that set up the Moscow branch kingdom, reporting back to Kiev in about 1000 AD through Vladimir the Great. So the mythos goes with Putin, and what they put in the newspapers in the early 2000s in Russia is that his father, Putin's father, moved to St. Petersburg just before World War I. And so Putin now is controlling Russia and is trying to retake Kiev. Basically, it's kind of like the holy city because he believes he's the illegitimate offspring coming from his grandfather, and that the Romanovs, they're basically defunct. And the Romanovs were a Puchianan bloodline, and that name changes because there isn't a son born, and a female has to intermarry with another Puchianan bloodline, the Romanovs, which is how you get the Romanov name on the dynasty. Now, when Putin is being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, he says, all I'm trying to do is put together the Romanov dynasty.
Yeah, that's where he thought it was a filler buster, but it was just basically tracing back his claim and the thought of Russia owning all this in that dynasty.
Yes, he's making clear to all of the royals and stuff around the world all the time what his intent is. They know. So the Europeans have been using the US to oppose that as the attack dogs, right? And Trump is saying, no, We're not going to play by those rules anymore. We'll see how long that lasts for, but he does seem to be empire driven from whether it's a white hat or a dark hat perspective, if that's what he's doing. Because he does look like he wants to add to his empire, whether or not it's Canada, whether or not it's Greenland, whether or not it's Venezuela, Cuba, wherever he's positioning to be able to do so. Whether or not he'll get it done or not, likely not, but he's certainly changing the whole global situation in terms of what the alliances were. So this is going to reshape the alliances. So it's
Trump has
another
some
step
connection to
along the
these
way.
bloodlines as well?
Does Trump? Some people say he does. I've not done a lot of research on it, but he doesn't seem to have significant bloodlines. Now he comes up through the left, in the politics to the Democrats. That's why he talks like a Democrat, which is why the Democrats hate him so much. And
Does he switch sides?
Because he switched sides, right? And not all, and certainly all of his policies wouldn't be conservative. It may be Republican, but it's not conservative, right? So it's that same party, one of the single unified party that controls things for the most part. So I don't think he has those significant bloodlines, but he knows how the world works. So what does he do? Does he take issue with the King of England? No, he does not. There's always a little bit more respect. With Xi, he recognizes that, and he wants to be on the same level, and he recognizes Putin sort of at a similar sort of level. And in fact, he's identifying more with Putin and Xi now than the Europeans, and is envisioning more of three forces of the world. But that's just going to have the Europeans pull out their money, and they'll become four pretty quick. How many that splits into at the end of the 10 kings is hard to know. But you start to see these global tectonic shifts starting to happen.
Okay. So how does this all affect the microcosm? Does that mean that Nephilim there's Nephilim influence all the way to, like, let's say the cool kids at school, leaders in gangs and stuff like that? Is there some kind of influence in that?
Sure, there is. They're all initiatory organizations. So imagine it as, and it's all just roles they play, white hats and dark hats, right? Good magic, black magic, good AI, evil AI. It's amazing what they do. So if you look at a typical, let's use the mafia because it's family driven, right?
Mhm.
And it's initiatory, and it has a godfather. And these mafia organizations, they run the dark side of the civilization so that the ones on the other side can run sort of the above board in the light aspects. And again, driving us, because we never get rid of the mafia. We never get rid of the people who are controlling all of the institutions. And they seem to be working together all of the time and driving us in a similar sort of direction. And that word Godfather, I mean, what do you think the Nephilims call their patriarchs? Godfathers. Celestial Mafia Godfathers is what the fallen angels are. So you have similar organizational structures and bloodlines um, that are running all of the dark sort of underworlds. And you know, out of China, you would have, and again, if we don't have the dynasty in place yet, but she is of the bloodlines, but all of the secret societies, whether it's the triads or whichever one you want to pick in terms of the mafia organizations of secret societies, are also initiatory and have Li or Shi people leading them around the world. That's not a coincidence. We have the same sort of organizational structure in place everywhere around the world. We just may not recognize them as being the same because they have different names for these types of things, but they all do the same things.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I was gonna ask. So, in Gary Wayne's opinion,
Yes.
is the Antichrist here now? And do you have any possible opinions of who it might be?
It's a really good question. So the question is how far are we away from the last 7 years, and whether or not Antichrist would be here as the Antichrist. And the Antichrist spirit is always around, as we're told in the Bible, and it's always waiting for an opportunity to take center stage. So that's always with us. So I think we are in the fig tree generation. And if we are, when's the starting point for that? And how long is a generation? So typically, some people will use 1947 declaration of Israel. The war was in 48. I would say Jerusalem is required to be in possession of the southern kingdom, the Judah southern kingdom, versus the lost tribes of the north for the end time. And it's the epicenter of end time prophecy. So they have to be in the covenant land, the southern kingdom, and they have to be in control of Jerusalem. So that was put in place in 1967. So if I were to pick one of the two dates, I'd pick the latter one because of the relationship of Jerusalem to end time prophecy. And we get a number of choices for how long is this generation. So in the wilderness, a generation was 40 years, as it's defined, that before they could enter into the promised land, Israel. And we also get in the Psalms it's 70 years or 80 years. And then we get 120 years in Genesis 6:3 for the maximum amount of life after God says that I'm not going to have immortal gods that are physical in this world. So if it's 40 years from 1967, well, we're kind of already in that zone. 70 years would suggest that we might be entering into the last 7 years in the 2030s. But what happens if it is 80 years or 120 years? And does it have to be a full generation? It probably doesn't. So I think we're a bit of a ways away yet. Now, the polytheists, and they're not reliable. They've been trying to bring about the end time from the beginning, but they declared 2025 as this age of the externalization of the hierarchy, or the making visible of the gods of the council and the entrance of Lord Maitreya. Not being visible at this time in terms of Lord Maitreya, but that was the age that Alice Bailey talked about beginning. So they think we're close to it, which is why you're seeing all of this hectic action for AI and the Davos people doubling down to move things forward at a faster pace. But I think that's a little bit optimistic or pessimistic because I don't want to be in the end time in the last 7 years because it's horrific. So I think we have a long ways to go yet because we have major stumbling blocks yet to go. So for Antichrist, he could be born right now, probably is born right now. And we won't even get a sort of like an inkling of who he might be until the beginning of the last 7 years. And then he's not revealed completely until he crowns himself God in the temple at the midpoint. Because there's going to be multiple antichrists, and he's going to need an antichrist to defeat before that to complete his pedigree. So people are going to be pointing at antichrist like crazy, as they do with all of the presidents. So now take that onto steroids once we see more wars and these 10 kings sort of coming about. And expect those 10 kings possibly to be all antichrist wannabes. But antichrist isn't one of them. He rises amongst those 10 kings in Daniel 7, after being part of the negotiating of the covenant in Daniel 9:27 to start the last 7 years. So do I think we're in the fig tree generation? Yes, I do. Do I think that, rapture or the last 7 years start in the next few years? No, there's too much to have happen. We haven't seen Babylon come on the stage yet with its false prophets. We haven't seen the formation of the 10 kings. We have to have a universal religion occur so that there's an ability to have the people of Judah be authorized in the covenant in Daniel 9:27 to begin the sacrifices on a wing of the temple. So a temple being rebuilt on a wing of what's already there, the Islamic mosque, and somehow Islam has to be removed, almost but destroyed, or come completely to heal by the universal religion for that to happen, because under no circumstances would they permit that happen to this day. Even a rumor of doing a sacrifice of a red heifer anywhere in Jerusalem, as with Hamas in the last go around, can start a war. So those are huge stumbling blocks before we can get to say that Antichrist is about to appear. And then when we start seeing things happen, he's not even going to be the one people are putting their money on at that time, because there's going to be multiple antichrists. And how do we know that? Jesus told us there'd be multiple antichrists. And in the epistles of John, it's reiterated. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. And then I think as far as one of the things that you mentioned is with Babylon and its false prophets, I think that might be around the cusp, because I know that I mean, Babylon, of course, is ancient Iraq, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I've been following is that Iran has been doing a lot of the destruction of the forming of the Iraqi government. So now, if Iran does fall, there's a big possibility of Iraq, becoming a powerful nation.
Or being almost destroyed. We don't know which way that's going to go. And you want to be careful with Babylon as well, as a physical location, as opposed to the allegory that is going on to describe it. And Babylon was a code word for both the Essenes and the followers of Jesus in the time of John, who wrote Revelation, as a code for Rome. Rome is the city. Because if you spoke out against Rome, you'd be put to death. So you would create what they call a Pesher code there. And it's defined Babylon as the seat of idolatry, which was at Palatine Hill. It doesn't have to be there, but it sort of lines up for that. And Babylon is the religion that comes down through Babel, which is the root word for Babylon biblically. And that's that religion that Nimrod had, which was the religion from before the flood. And so it's going to be a mystical religion as it's described. And Babylon is also a city. It is a religion. It is an economic organization, and it's a geopolitical organization that reigns over these 10 kings. So it needs to come along first, and however or whatever it's going to be, it is a long ways from taking form and somehow pulling in all of the other religions, even splitting Christianity with the falling away. So you're going to need false prophets who are going to predict things that are probably contrived catastrophes to convert to this religion or be destroyed from the face of the earth. And we see that language being used in the sciences today, whether or not it's in global warming, we're going to destroy ourselves from the face of the earth, or in the war aspect with nuclear weapons. They're already trying to scare us, or the weather patterns are going to destroy us from the face of the earth, or some asteroid's going to come and destroy us. It's all the same language. So expect that when the false prophets come out, it's going to be powerful enough to convince people, and it's going to crater all of the monotheist religions to a large degree to fold into polytheism. There will be the remnant that does not go for it, and that it will also bring home all of the various forms of the original polytheist religion. So this very much is going to be an umbrella religion and have enough power to be able to enforce Israel's safety, to do the sacrifices in the temple and to basically not be a warrior nation anymore. And they're going to live in peace, as Ezekiel 38 and 39 talk about. They're going to grow rich from that as well. So lots of things yet to happen is my story. And one thing I realized I didn't get to your who might the Antichrist figures might be. I would look for some of the major bloodlines, at least to be amongst the wannabes. Who knows? Antichrist could be a total surprise figure. Um, but if you're looking at from the lens of today as prominent bloodlines, you would have to look at the Windsors as one, um, and probably with William versus Charles. And you would look at Anjou bloodlines that are still in place. And there's three groups of Anjou bloodlines. The Savoys are still there, and they're a rival to the King of Jerusalem. When the Habsburgs believe they have Anjou and nobleness and the rights to the King of Jerusalem title. The current King of Jerusalem is the Bourbon family um, that holds that title of the King of Jerusalem. And so you've got those bloodlines that are in play in the West. But when we look at Daniel 8, you have in the latter part of the empire of Greece, this king is going to rise. Now, Greece was split into four sections. It was a large empire, and Rome was part of that empire, and it succeeds the Greek Empire. And then you have sort of the northern half of Greece and going east, and then you have the Middle East part going, into Iraq essentially, and then you had the Middle East part where you had Egypt and North Africa and whatever parts of that whole empire. So you have a fairly large geography of that Greek Empire and a more limited Roman Empire access. So I'm not convinced it's going to be a royale out of England or a royale out of France. I would be looking for more royales within that geometry of the four quadrants of the Greek Empire. So that could be Middle East of some sort of format. It could be North Africa. It could be like Egyptian. We don't know, but they're also going to have to fake a pedigree, either fake or be real, that somehow goes back to Jewish bloodlines and Davidic bloodlines. And as the Anjou like to project, the bloodlines of Jesus. So you see all sorts of different things happening on that. So we want to be really careful with trying to say who Antichrist might be, because there's a lot around just yet to be played out. Not only in events that have to happen, but how the royales are going to duke it out.
Well, Gary, as expected, you have not disappointed. You've been very informative. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you please do us a favor and pray us out?
I certainly can. Father in heaven, we thank you for our blessings. We thank you for creating everything. You are the God Most High. We worship you. We honor you. We hope that you bless us and bless the audience so that we can take the information as we work in your word to help us arm ourselves and to help other people to become more aware and be more prepared for what likely is coming, but do so in your way and in your Son's name, our Redeemer, the Word Jesus, who sits at your right hand side and testifies to you for us and for all of the saints. Amen.
Amen and amen. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time for another episode of Grotto in the Tarpit.